Points of interest, which we sometimes abbreviate as POI, are custom locations that you define in the program. They might be things like shelter locations, fire stations, hospitals, or whatever you need to reference to help your operations. HURREVAC lets you apply these points in several ways. You can simply put labels on the map for reference. You can use POI to precisely label map layers for wind timing and storm surge data. You can use POI to add more details to reports beyond the counties that would usually be listed. And you can even base custom timeline actions around the arrival time of tropical storm force winds at your points. The full applications of POI are described in the HURREVAC user guide. In this video, we'll show you how to create, manage, and customize your POI list, and some basic demonstrations of how POI can be applied. There are multiple ways to add points of interest, either one at a time or imported as a batch. Let's start with a fast and simple way to get a point of interest on the map. When I right-click anywhere on the map, the second item in the context menu is called Create Point of Interest. And when I click on that, I can type in the name, let's just call this Test, and click Add, and that immediately puts the test point on the map. And here it's just a random place in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. But let's say what I wanted to do was show where a tropical storm was in relation to Key West. And notice that on this base map, Key West isn't already labeled. So I'll zoom in just a little bit and find the location and right-click there. And now click Create Point of Interest. And I'll have to type in Key West. And here's where I have a choice to make. By default, there's three categories or three types of points of interest in HURREVAC. These are predefined: surge flag, wind timing flag, and other. To make this point something besides other, I would just start typing and that would create a new category. Maybe instead of other, I'll call this city and click Add. So now that I see Key West labeled there, that's stored in my user profile. But having it displayed on the map is temporary, so the next time I log into the program, I'll have to turn it back on again. So here's where you can find your list of points of interest to do that. So about halfway down the toolbar on the right side of the workspace is what looks like a map marker icon. And that opens a folder that contains Geocode Location, which we'll come back to in just a little bit. And down at the bottom is Points of Interest. And when I click on that, a window opens in the top right corner of the map. And now I have those 2 points I just created, Test and Key West. And you see the checkbox to the left of the name shows that it's turned on. Now the next time I log into HURREVAC, these would probably be unchecked. So I would check them again to add those points to the map. And note that as I zoom out and zoom back in, I do have to be zoomed in to a particular level to get that point to appear and then to get that label to appear. And now another important thing to keep in mind before you start making all of your points. How many points you want to add will depend on a couple of things: what your area of responsibility is like, and what you plan to do with your points in the program. A point can be as specific as an address or a landmark, or as general as a town, like Key West here. So if my purpose was simply to label Key West on this regional view, or define a wind timing flag, this kind of approximate point can work. But if my purpose of having a point of interest was to examine my critical facilities alongside the storm surge inundation map, that's very local, and I'd have to zoom in and be much more specific when I start making my points. So now I'll show you how to precisely define a point of interest using the Geocode Location search. If I'm already in my points of interest list here, I can click Add POI in the lower left corner to bring up the Geocode Location window. If I wasn't already in my Points of Interest Manager, I would go back to that map marker icon, open the list on the right side of the workspace, and click Geocode Location. And that takes me to the same search function. So let's say I wanted to look for City Hall in Key West. And I could search the street address, or I could just try and search the landmark name. Now this is an open source search, so sometimes a precise result may not be there and you'll have to do some additional searching to get it to show up. But based on that initial text prompt, HURREVAC got to the right location. And the tracking map now shows an orange dot for the result, along with this text bubble that shows the full address. And if I was happy with this and wanted to turn it into a POI to add to my list, I would click Add as POI, and now I have some more choices to make. I can edit this default name that it gives me. Perhaps this is a little long and I just want to simplify this to City Hall. I would type in my new text right there. And as I mentioned earlier, points of interest are organized into types, which lets you assign custom appearances. So maybe I wanted to give a special color and font to City Hall. Maybe I'll call this a government type to distinguish it from things like hospitals or schools in my area. And now I'll click Add, and now that's going to be entered into my list of POI. And I could continue to search for more addresses and landmarks and add those places. But I'll show you one very helpful shortcut inside Geocode Location. So let's say I wanted to search for a place that had a name that was kind of generic and might exist in a lot of different counties and cities. Say I search for Fire Station 1 or Memorial Hospital. That might take my results to somewhere entirely different in the country. So if I wanted to search for hospital, but only get a result inside Key West, I would click this checkbox just below the search bar called Restrict Search to Current Map View. And now I won't get hospital results in New York or Texas. That will probably give me a result right here in Monroe County. But be sure to double check the results and the address to make sure it's exactly what you want. And let's just say I was trying to search for the airport terminal and the geocode location wasn't taking me to the right place. What I could always do is make sure I was zooming into the right place on the map, then right click and create point of interest from the context menu. And that's another way I can add my points of interest to the list. Well, you might have noticed that I had a typo on my spelling of airport. So how would I fix that? I will go to my point of interest list, again by going to the menu in the right toolbar. And now I have my list. Airport is at the bottom. I can double click into this row to rename or adjust the spelling or even change the type of it. And I have to be sure to click the update button. And now that correction is saved in my user profile. So let's look at some other things I can do to manage and filter and sort my points. I can just click on a column header name, like name here or type over here on the right, and that will shuffle my points of interest in alphabetical order. If I had a long list of points of interest and wanted to quickly drill down to something, I can use this filter search box at the top. It works a lot like the storm search bar in the map layers panel. And you'll remember that test point that I made, the very first one. And let's say I wanted to refresh my memory on where exactly that was. I would click the checkbox next to it, and I don't see it anywhere around town. But to quickly go to where that point is, I would click Zoom to Selection in the top right corner and see that that's that test point I made out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And I don't really want that anymore. So to get rid of it, I will click Delete Selection in the top right corner. And when I do so, note that it goes away right away. So be careful with that delete button. And every now and then you might want to actually save a backup of your points of interest. So let's take a quick look at where you go to import and export your POI list. After all, it can be very useful to be working from the same list as your colleagues and to share that information back and forth. So you have a couple of options. In the lower right corner of the points of interest window, I can click Export All and see that I have the options to export my list as an Excel file or as a GeoJSON file. Let's say I've done so and emailed that off to my colleague, and they're trying to import it into their HURREVAC workspace. They would click Import. And note that if it's something somebody's already exported from HURREVAC, it should work properly. But the description under Import here also gives you a clue as to how you could get other data types imported into HURREVAC. Let's say you had a CSV. If you formatted those points into an Excel file with those particular headers in that order, then you could save that, find it on your workspace, and then import it into your HURREVAC list. There's more information about how to do that in the HURREVAC user guide, and the shortcut to get to the points of interest page is the question mark in the top right corner of the window. So notice that my earlier points were unchecked, so I can click the checkbox in the header to turn them all on at once, click Zoom to Selection, and see where they're all at. There's no limit on the number of points you can create, but for best performance, we recommend fewer than 50. If you want to have more than that, what you could do is export and import different segments of your list and shuffle them in and out of the program as needed. Now notice that I have three different types here: airport, government, and city, and those are arbitrary, but HURREVAC decided to assign different colors to each of those points representing the different type. I can customize that type and also the font size and the font styling. I'll show you how to do that right now. In the lower left corner of the points of interest window, I would click POI Styles. Now the top section has a drop-down list of my points of interest type. I can add or delete those. For example, there's that misspelling of airports. I'm going to delete that type. Now let's say we want the icon for the airport location to be bright red with bold text. Let's make that change. And that's the second section of this window. Under Symbology, I get a control for the symbol size, and I want to make that a little bit larger using the slider and click a dark red color. Now notice it's not changing on the map yet, but it is changing in this preview window right here. So first I have to click OK, then I have to click Save in the lower right corner, and that takes effect. But I wanted to make that font size bigger too. So let's go into the font type menu and maybe move this up to size 18 and give it a bold styling and also make it that same dark red color. And based on my preview, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click OK in the small window, then click Save in the User Preferences window, and now it's taken effect on the map. And I could continue to do this as much as I wanted for all my different types. And just like we did with the POI list, I can also export and share or import somebody else's POI style settings using these import and export buttons at the bottom. That will give me a small JSON file that's easy to share back and forth with your team. So here's an example of how POI can show up in a report. We'll go back to Tropical Storm Elsa Advisory 15 from 2021. The storm was still east of Jamaica at that time, but the forecast track had a close approach to Key West. So let's see what time that tropical storm force wind was expected to arrive. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm running my deterministic wind timing report. And this shows a list of all the counties in the deterministic swath. But if I go to my Include menu above the report and click the checkbox for points of interest, now those are listed alongside my counties, or if I uncheck the box next to counties, those are removed and I'm just seeing the times of arrival and departure at my points of interest. And you see how my points are so closely spaced relative to how large the wind field is. So that's why I have the exact same start and end time for this tropical storm force wind time of arrival. So if our point of having POI was to look at time of arrival of winds, it's not really necessary to have dozens or hundreds of points in the same town. But if I were a state level official and had points up and down the coastline, you could see how those would have different results and be very useful to me. For more information about how you can use points of interest as data labels, go to the HURREVAC user guide and browse to the pages about wind timing graphics and flags or surge flags.